So to render the HUD is thankfully rather trivial, in my case anyway, because I'm just going to draw some text to the screen. The assignment is probably going to include a step where you get to make the HUD more involved and something prettier. I want to just first go look at my update here. This code seems that it should not be there. I'm just gonna bring the collision out into a function. So extract a method, call it check collisions. That makes sense. And also add a to do here. When we have collisions, we probably want to play a sound effect. So I'm going to have to show you how to do that a bit later. So update the player, all entities, check collisions, check if it's game over. This can also be made a function because we're going to want to add more features here. When we are setting a game over, we probably want to save the current score, for example, because we want a high score thing. So I'm going to refactor this into a method as well. Extract a method. Let's call that check game over. And then do high score. So something needs to be kept count of for a score to count, right? You can probably add bullets and be shooting the enemies, for example, and count how many you've killed. The easiest thing for me to do right now is just count how far I've traveled. So should that be an integer and call that... Actually, let's make it a float. Let's make it an integer. Let's make it a float and call it distance traveled. Because we have a velocity and a position, etc. So I can just count this up every frame, and then I can compare it to whatever values we've saved from previous games. In my respawn then, I need to make sure that that's set to 0 again. Maybe I should give this responsibility to the player, in fact, should maybe not be here in the game class. In update, we have player update, we have all of this stuff. And so every time we go through, distance traveled plus player speed. Because that's essentially what we're doing, right? Every time the player updates, if this was another game where the player was moving across the screen, we just add the player velocity to its position. So this is a pretty good approximation of calculating how much distance we've traveled. Just add our velocity every frame to the counter. So in this case, we could use distance traveled for whatever reason here. When we come to saving stuff later. Check collisions, play blah. Right, so back to rendering the HUD. We probably want this to be a function, so I'm just going to start with declaring one. Let's call it render HUD. It should take 2 arguments, canvas, and a paint object. Just like our entities are doing. Which means I can then call it, sorry, I wanted to copy this part, render HUD. And I am drawing the HUD last in the render loop, sorry, in the render call. So first we draw a full background so that we clear the screen, we draw all of our entities, the background, the enemies, and then we place the player, and then we draw the HUD all over everything so that entities cannot cover the user interface here. So let's see, what do we want to do? Well, first of all, we can use the paint object to set our, say, colors for the text. So I'm pretty sure set color will be excellent for this. We use color, and I'm just going to do that white. I want to set the alignment of the text so that it's left aligned. You have other settings if you want to. And the alignment settings is part of the paint object. So it's paint align left, in this case, whatever you want, test stuff. Lastly, let's see, we want to set text size perhaps. And as you notice, there is a ton of settings. So that's a float for text size. Should probably make that a variable. So the reason you want this to be a variable, among many other things, of course, you want configurability, but if you want to print multiple lines, you want to make sure that you can offset them with the correct size. So let's make float text size equals to, I have no idea. Let's call it 24. Lastly, we can just choose what to print. So canvas, draw text, a string. So what do we have? Let's call it health for now. That's an easy one. Player health. And the two arguments after that is position and the paint object. So I'm going to just put this at, say, 10 pixels in, 10 pixels down, and paint. Let's see how that turns out. Where is the emulator? Here we go. Check the timer. 5 minutes. Perfect. So I am not offset enough, clearly. I'm still writing text up there, and the text should probably be larger. So let's make this 48. Then I'm going to position it at coordinate 48, so it's exactly its own height from the top edge. 10 from X is fine. One thing I want to do here is probably have, well, one thing you should do absolutely is move any strings out of the game and into the resource system and then load it at runtime. And we should have a string for normal gameplay and a string for when we are in game over so the player can see what's going on. That's not what I want. I want the emulator. Here we go. Start over. And also probably an instruction for, I should change the rules for the health so that once it's 0 we are dead. It looks nicer. You probably also need instructions here so the player knows to click the screen to start. Where is the game over condition? That's here. Let's call that once we're less than 1. I'm not doing an equality comparison to 0 because less than 1 is more robust. It will deal with more states than just equals to 0. Last change. This is pretty much an unnecessary. There we go. 0. We're game over. So at this point, we probably want to have, let's see, if not game over, draw this text. Otherwise, let's see, game over. This should probably be centered, and that's, I'm not entirely sure how to do because I don't know how wide the text is going to be, but let's start with just putting it at X, stage width divided by 2, and maybe also setting it in sort of the middle of the screen. So stage height divided by 2. We might want another line here, and so now I need this to be a variable so that I can reference it again. So I'm going to make a final float. Let's call that center Y. And why did I do that? Because now I can do center Y plus text size so that I separate these two lines properly. And then we can instruct the player. Press to restart. Hopefully anyway. That should be final. And let's try this. So obviously game over should probably not be here at the very start of the game, and I need to move this back so it's centered in the screen because this looks horrible, but at least there is one instruction, or a instruction. So death, oh, okay, that's very quick because my finger of course is still down. All right, well, you're gonna have to polish this. Now you know how to put text onto the surface, so I'm gonna close this video down and then we can look at sound effects.